Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Good evening, Alex. I'm doing well. It's been a good week and obviously pretty exciting to talk about a win, and almost feels like it's been an age since we got to chat about some positive City news.
Yeah, absolutely. First away win since January 1st, I think it is, which is pretty remarkable, and another clean sheet to boot. So we will kick off with that game against Gillingham. And I want to get your thoughts on, I guess, to start with, the quality of the opposition, and with no necessarily with no disrespect to Gillingham, but were you as surprised as I was at the sort of caliber of opposition that we face in this game, and sort of the sense of what we've got to expect in League One going forward?
Interestingly enough, it was pretty close to what I think I did expect in my head. I knew that the talk about some of these regional grounds that we would be visiting were going to be very different to what I guess we're used to and have grown accustomed to over the last decade, particularly in the likes of playing Premier League football and Championship. With all due respect, there are some smaller Championship teams who probably have punched above their weight and have crept into the tail end of the Championship. But I guess it was pretty close to what I expected. And I guess we see that in the reflection of the side that we put out. Again, if we compare them to City teams over the past few years, it is quite a short step in regards to the quality, I guess. And it's very clear to us that the team that we're producing is nowhere near the caliber of those sides, but at the same time may suit this league quite well.
Yeah, and look, it sort of reminded me a little bit of our return to the Championship under Steve Bruce, where we, I think, went to Huddersfield first up, or they came to us, and funnily enough, won 2-0 as well, where, you sort of look at that first game and you think it could go one of two ways. We've just been relegated from the higher division. We could continue that form slump on and really struggle in this first game back, or we can put a marker down and say, look, we're not going to be in this division for long. We want to really stamp our authority, show what we're made of. And 16 shots to 6 for the game, 6 on target to 1 shot on target, goal after 3 minutes to Lewis Potter. It couldn't have been a better start to the season for us.
Absolutely not. I think that kind of summed it up. I think 3 minutes into the game to find yourself 1-0 up away from home, particularly when we really grew accustomed to City slipping at the start of games, in particular at the back end of that Championship season. It was quite a shock to the system, but a very welcome one.
Yeah, definitely. What were your, I guess, apart from Lewis Potter scoring the opening goal, what were your main takeaways from the game in terms of positives, I guess? I mean, for me personally, I think, you look across the board, I don't think there was a particularly weak performance out there, which I guess was a really good positive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the two takeaways for me, and I know you said apart from Ken Lewis Potter, I think that he was a really exciting thing for us. And I think just given the fact that we saw glimpses of that in the last season, there was a real excitement from the City fans, I think, particularly when he scored against Birmingham, I think it was. We had that great win. And I guess from there, he just kind of fizzled, or wasn't given the playing time that we kind of thought that if he had have been provided, he may have kicked on a little bit. So to see him kind of hit the ground running was a huge takeaway. And I guess I think the other one that really stood out for me was George Honeyman in the middle. I think that in the Championship, he can struggle on days. I think he has the same kind of work rate, but the quality isn't always there, and you can see him kind of get bullied off the ball a lot. And particularly in the role that we need him to play, he's not always, I guess, able to control the midfield in the same manner that we've expected. But I thought he did that really well against Gillingham. And again, if that's the caliber of teams that we're playing, the exciting thing for me is he could be a huge asset in this division.
Yeah, look, it was funny before the game. I think there was an article with McCann where he sort of said at the moment, I think the article was a few days ago where he said at the moment supporters can't really trust anything he says. They've got to put the actions out on the pitch. But then I think before the game, there was an article basically saying that Lewis Potter might have to bide his time, wasn't necessarily going to start every game or start as much as fans might have wanted him to. And then of course he's in the starting lineup, and we think, okay, well, actually, yeah, we can't really believe anything you say. It was a great positive surprise to see him in the lineup. Were you expecting it for the first game of the season?
I don't know if I was expecting it, mainly on the back of that story, but regardless, I think that they're the types of things that McCann also talked about, the idea that it's now time for them to kind of prove their worth to the fans and reacquaint themselves. So playing someone like Lewis Potter, who obviously has endeared himself to the fans and they do want to see more of, regardless of what he says in press conferences, if he's there on the team sheet, but that's an exciting prospect for us. So I wasn't hugely surprised that he was there, because I think he's definitely a starting striker in this league. But the fact that he was included was, I guess the cherry on the top of the cake.
At the other end of the pitch, another positive performance from Matt Ingram, who really is sort of cementing his spot as a starting keeper. It'd be interesting to see. We'll talk a bit later about the Leeds game, whether Long gets a start in that one. But Ingram's certainly proving that it's his position to lose.
Absolutely, and I think that on the back of the back of last season with George Long, it was really hard for the City fans to kind of acquaint themselves with him, and became a cause of much frustration, particularly being on the back of some of those hidings. So the opportunity is certainly there for Ingram, and as you said, he hasn't really put a foot wrong thus far. So long may that continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I guess the other real positive for me was Josh Emanuel at right back, who again just hasn't put a foot out of place in his first couple of games for City. And it's funny, I mean, he signed on the same day as Louis Coyle, and I guess we sort of naturally assumed that Coyle was going to be that first choice starting right back, and Emanuel was sort of his understudy. And I guess by fortune on Emanuel's part, that Coyle had that 2-game suspension to start the season. He sort of started the games ahead of Coyle for the time being, and it looks like he's another one where it's really his spot to lose at the moment, because he's just being fantastic in that right spot. He's marauding up the field really well. He seems to have a really good sort of ball control. It's hard to explain, but I guess, I mean, like when he's running with the ball, he just looks so assured on the ball and really hard to sort of dislodge from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And found himself in some really positive areas too. That's one of the things that certainly escaped us in the previous season, was just having that lack of assurance from what those players in those back positions were giving us. I know that it was unsettling with the players that didn't return, and there was a kind of a lot of makeshift positions where people were forced to play out of position. But to see him come in and play the way he did on Saturday was fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess, on the other end of things, whilst I wouldn't say that anyone had a particularly poor performance, I thought Fleming and Wilkes probably faded a bit in and out of the game. They weren't as prolific or sort of making their way around the ground as much as other players, such as Emanuel or Lewis Potter and others in those positions. But how did you see the squad? What areas of improvement did you see in the performance?
I think because of the yardstick in the fact that it was Gillingham, and it's such a difficult league for us to kind of comment on. This almost feels like it's a recalibration of such, given the fact that it is a totally new look team, with, I guess, a very new look set of objectives as well. I haven't really read too much into it. I would love to give some in-depth analysis, but I think that in that first 90 minutes, it's really hard for us to tell at this point as to where we do need to strengthen, and also what plays we're kind of looking for to grab those opportunities. But as you mentioned with Emanuel and Coyle, and whether Keane Lewis Potter starts, all those kind of things, what I will say is it's a really positive start to the season, knowing that there are already players who are fighting for positions. And I think that can only be a healthy thing, particularly when you're starting a season. But there's almost an area or a change in the feel around the place, given the fact that we have got guys fighting for positions, and it's not so much of a almost have to play that person, because if they don't play there, who else have we got type thing, which it certainly felt like as we lost a few people towards the back end of last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, having dropped down a division, you could argue the caliber of players maybe dropped. But that aside, I mean, the fact that we now have quite a deep squad, and you're quite right. Towards the end of last season, we had no right backs. So regardless of their caliber, we had no right backs who could start the games for us. So it was whoever was available or whoever was able to play there. And we now have two really quality right backs, whether it's for this division or the championship, really. So it's fantastic to see that depth. And I think in a long season as we have ahead of us, where we could be playing upwards of 55 games, taking into account all the other league trophies and things like that, having a deep squad is going to be a really valuable thing. And look, we made another addition in the last couple of days, who we'll talk about in just a second. But just before we move off of this game, I will say as well, it was remarkable to learn that I think Gillingham had one loss in their last 15 games or something like that at the back end of last season. So you talk about not really having a sense of this league and what the yardstick is and all that sort of thing. And you're quite right. Like, Gillingham could have an awful season this year and go down, and we've just played one of the relegation teams. And there's it's hard to get a sense of the league until things start to settle in about 5 or 6 games. But on the face of things and how they were last season, it was a tremendous performance. So just before we move off the game, what we're going to start doing each week is we'll try and do a 3-2-1 of our most valuable players in the match. We could have the same 3 players, we could have different players, and I'll sort of try and tally it up. And at the end of the season, we'll have our own sort of MVP award for whoever that player is. So I'll let you go first if you've got 3 players that come to mind as most valuable for the game.
Yeah, so I think the 3 points has to be Emanuel, as you've already spoken about. He was fantastic. He was everywhere. He got into those really good areas. My 2 points probably goes to Honeyman. I thought that he was probably a little bit weak on some of his set pieces throughout the game, but I thought just his overall kind of pressure and I guess the way he did control the midfield, I thought he had a pretty good game, particularly given the fact that I feel like I've been a really harsh critic of his in the start of this calendar year. So I thought he was fantastic. And then I'll probably give it to Lewis Potter purely for the goal. And also the fact that he still did have a pretty handy game himself. But as you mentioned, I think that goal in the first 3 minutes really just kind of springboarded us and got us moving, which was really crucial in the scope of the 90 minutes.
Yeah, look, and I've gone pretty similar to you. I agree. Emanuel for the 3 votes. He was just everywhere on the ground at times in the match, and was a really vital cog in what we were trying to do. I've given the 2 to Ingram partly just because I think it's look, it's no slight on Long, because when Long was in form last season, he was a fantastic keeper for us. But the way he finished that campaign and the fact that Ingram is giving him that competition, which I think was your emphasis before, was a really vital one, which is having this competition around the pitch just really elevates players' games. So Ingram had a tremendous game for mine and got the 2 votes. And then, as you said, Lewis Potter for the 1. I think the speed with which we scored can't be undersold on how important that was, that it really settled the nerves for the players and really got us going and settled us into the game. And he's going to be a fantastic player for us. I just really hope that he's going to at least get to start for the time being, having scored that goal. Give him a bit of confidence, give him a run in the side and see what he can produce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're probably not alone in that viewpoint. It would be really nice to see him kick on and score the kind of numbers of goals that we do believe that he's capable of doing.
Absolutely. Well, I sort of alluded to it before. We'll move on to talk about the off-field news that we've had in the last week. And the first bit of news was the signing of Thomas Meyer, who was a free agent playing in the 2nd division in Austria last season at Austria Lustenau, I believe it's pronounced. He scored 6 goals and had 11 assists. So as a winger, that's a pretty solid return. And I don't have a strong knowledge of the Austrian 2nd division, so I don't know what the quality is like there. But if it's anything sort of comparable to League One, then it's a pretty handy player that we picked up on a free transfer, and yet another player who's adding a bit of depth and giving some pressure in those forward positions. And at the moment, I guess we've got Scott, Samuelson, and Wilkes. So just adding another player to that mix is a really vital thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a signing that I think it's fair to say that nobody saw coming. and McCann was very tight-lipped on who it was as well. There was a lot of kind of speculation that there was a winger arriving, and it certainly Thomas Mayer wasn't the name that we seemed to be linked with. And when he got announced, I think it was somewhat of a shock, which perhaps could be a sign of some of the things to expect in being in League One. That the radar, I guess, for players seems to be far wider spread as far as our recruitment goes and the players that we are looking to sign. But I guess he'll have his time, and as you said, he goes into a pool of players who will be fighting really hard for those positions, but does kind of indicate that we do have a little bit of depth in the squad required for, like you said, playing potentially up to 55 games or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, as you sort of alluded to there was a bit of speculation that we were looking to sign Randell Williams from Exeter. Interestingly, in the last 24 hours or so, the Peterborough chairman, who we've been sort of battling with Peterborough on potentially signing the player, and there was a bit of news that he was sort of edging further towards Peterborough than to us. The Peterborough chairman came out and I mean, he said on Twitter that they weren't interested in signing him. I don't know how much you can take him at his word. But McGann did say after the game that we had agreed a fee for a player, which suggests that it wasn't Thomas Mayer who we'd agreed that fee for. So the speculation was that it was Williams. And so he had scored 5 goals and had 14 assists for Exeter last season. So he's another one with a pretty prolific return, especially in terms of assists. Who would be a pretty valuable addition and a player who knows the division quite well, and would be a pretty handy pickup if we can get him.
Yeah, he certainly sounds like quite the player. I think it's a somewhat humbling experience for a lot of the City fans, and I say this respectfully, is the fact that we're in a perceived battle for a trade battle with Peterborough probably shows the extent of how far we've fallen in regard to the kind of pool that players see when they're looking for a club, where they rank City or versus the rest of the teams in the division. So, I think a year ago, if you found that we were going to get edged out to a signing by Peterborough, you would have had a heart attack. But I think it's a good reality check for us to see where we're at. And I think that if the Williams signing was to come off, that would be a fantastic one for just the depth in the squad and the type of player with good numbers that present really positive opportunities to kind of make their mark on this team and really push for the top end of League One, which is where we should be aiming to finish.
Yeah, so that's one to watch over the next few days. I suspect with the sale of Lopez, which I think went through just after we'd recorded last week. So there always seems to be a bit of player movement right after these podcasts go to air, because we had Lopez last week, and I think we signed name's gone out of my head now. Southampton player that we signed, Alfie, forgotten his last name. Anyway, we signed him from Southampton the week before. So there's always seems to be a bit of transfer news right after the podcast airs. So we'll see what happens with that one. In other off-field news, however, we have had the interesting news today around potential attendances back at the KCOM ahead of our first home game for the season against Crewe Alexandra this weekend. I think the EFL's been looking at doing sort of trial matches where you can have up to 1,000 supporters in the stadium. Presumably, you basically have family units sitting together and spread out far enough apart that it's deemed pretty safe. 1,000 supporters isn't a huge atmosphere, but any sort of atmosphere, any sort of positive home support could only be a good thing for the side. And it's pretty exciting news to potentially start to get supporters back at games. What did you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's probably the first step in the right direction as to returning to normal goes. But I think it's really interesting knowing that the fabric of football in the country of England and what it means to the people, just not having that opportunity or that outlet on weekends to go to games. You can see how much it kind of affects those communities. And as you said, only 1,000 people, you look at it and going, it is such a small number in the scheme of the capacity of certainly our ground. But I guess that, as you said, any number is going to be effective. And I think that for the players to instead, be playing in front of the empty seats and the recorded noises and the crowd sounds, it would make a huge difference. I also imagine that the way that those 1,000 people would be scattered, they would still have quite a good positioning around the stadium. So I guess when we think about things like the Upper West Stand and things and places like that don't really get any use anyway, if you can concentrate those 1,000 people in a way around the stadium that gives it some kind of atmosphere, as you said, it would be far better than nothing. So a really positive step, and I do hope that that they are able to roll it out reasonably quickly, and it does become a positive step forward without any cases or anything that causes too much disruption or setback. But it would be great to see.
Yeah, and look, as you say, I mean, it's not only the club and revenue streams for the club or anything like that that's impacted by no crowds. It's obviously the pubs and the fooderies and things like that around the grounds. So as crowds start to come back to games, it will sort of start to see that boost back to the economy, which will be great to see. Speaking from my own experience, I got to go along to an Aussie rules game here a couple of months ago, I guess, just as our first wave was ending. And there was about 200 of us there. And like you say, I mean, you're pretty scattered around the area, but any sort of noise, any sort of support for the club is always going to be preferred to the sort of pre-recorded noises that you get through the TV. So look, it'll be great if we can get supporters back. And if it's as soon as this weekend, that's a fantastic step in the right direction. And just fingers crossed, as you say, that it's all done safely and there's no uptick in cases. There's no issues with people's health. And it can all just proceed in a positive manner. And it was Alfie Jones. I did remember his last name as we were talking. It's always the case you have a blank whilst trying to think of someone's name. But look, we'll move on from the off-field discussion then. And as we did last week, we'll do a player review every week this season. We'll look back at a City player on their career so far with City and sort of assess where they're at and think back on some of the positive moments that we've had with that player. And this week we're looking at Jordy De Wijs, who had a somewhat ill-forgotten spell as captain towards the end of last season, which was probably the one blemish on his City career to date. But signed for £300,000 as a pretty unheard of player from the Netherlands, and took a little while to settle in his first season, as is sort of expected with those foreign signings. But then has really stepped up and had a fantastic career with City over the last couple of seasons. So how have you seen his City career so far, Logan?
Yeah, I guess mixed is probably the right word. I think that when I try to sum Jordy De Wijs up and the qualities or characteristics that I really enjoy about him is his physical presence. Obviously, he's big and he's strong. And as you mentioned, he's really struggled in that leadership role when he's had the captain's armband. But his leadership in the way that he plays is actually a really strong thing for him. And he certainly brings a presence about him that I don't think, particularly on the current roster at City, that anybody else really has in that kind of area or that strength that he does. So I think he's in a league of his own in that way, in some respects. He certainly had a career that's been marred by injury in his City shirt. He's still played a little bit, but it's definitely been inconsistent where he goes on some pretty good runs. And I think that one of the things that stood out for me is when we're kind of looking to sum him up was when he did get injured. I think it was maybe halfway through the back end of last season, and then the COVID stoppage happened. There was this real kind of assurance of, at least when we return to the field, Jordy De Wijs will be injured, and that would be really helpful for our run in. And as history has it, it wasn't. But just the fact that he is a player who we've watched enough and have kind of had feelings of being able to feel safe and have that confidence of when he's in the team, he does offer a lot, particularly at this level. I think that whilst it's been a mixed career, if he stays fit and we're able to obviously hold on to him, he could really have a huge future in a City shirt, particularly in League One. I think that he's the type of player that would just be an absolute harrowing menace for the prospect of other teams coming to the KCOM and knowing that he's in the side. It's certainly going to be a strong player that would be hard to beat. So I like him. I think that he's had as I said, a mixed career, but there's so many attributes about Jordy De Wijs that we would be silly to kind of write off, despite the fact that it hasn't always gone the way that we've expected it to go with Jordy.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, to be honest, I'm really surprised that he's still with us this season. I think in the off season there was a fair bit of rumours going around that he was off to the MLS. I think at one point he deleted all of the City posts off his social media, so there was a lot of speculation that there was a pretty imminent move. So he's still with us, and that's fantastic. If he's fully committed to City and he wants to be here, then that's great. He seems to have started the season pretty well, and look, as you say, I think at this level, him and Burke is a really solid partnership in defence. I don't think there's a whole lot of teams that would have a better central defensive partnership than those two. So I think it could be a really fantastic season for him. He's got 15 clean sheets over his City career and 3 goals. And I think my favourite memory of him is probably one of those 3 goals, which was the winner against Wigan a couple of seasons ago, where he scored the goal and you felt like the club for the first time in quite a while was really kind of united, and all of the supporters getting behind the team as he celebrated that goal. I think it was a goal to put us pretty close to the playoff places under Adkins, and there was that sort of sense that we might be starting to build something, and as unfortunately it wasn't the case, but at the time it was just a fantastic moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the most memorable moment I also share with him in a City shirt. But I think it also comes back to, as you mentioned, that £300,000 kind of cost that we bought him for. That for that price tag, I think that he's easily worth that and probably more. So as far as his business with City, he has been a really astute signing.
Absolutely. Well, we'll look ahead now. We do have 2 clashes coming up. The first of which is tomorrow morning our time, so 4:45 a.m. will be a tough rise for any Australian supporters getting up for the game. I'm going to make the best effort to get up for it. It's going to be a fantastic clash against Premier League opposition. I don't know how many chances we're going to get to play a Premier League side this season, so especially one with as much of a heated rivalry as Leeds. Looking at their squad, we know their manager, Marcelo Bielsa, who's done a good job with them. He's got them finally up to the Premier League, a job that many managers found impossible before him. Strong Premier League squad. I guess there's not much to say about their squad. It's quite clearly a superior squad to ours. On their day, they would be superior to us. But I guess the fact that, they lost their first game to Liverpool 4-3, they'll be looking at this League Cup game perhaps as a distraction from their Premier League campaign rather than as an opportunity to do well. They might use it as a chance to rotate and rest some of their players. Depending on their lineup, it's an opportunity as ever there is to go out there and try and win a game like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I had to hold back the vomit taste in my mouth as you spoke. And I think the crazy thing is as well to think that only a couple of months ago, we sat in the same division, and then we're almost conceding that they're a far bigger club than us now, and have such promise. So you talk about the players they brought in, and I guess the caliber of personnel they have in their squad with the signing of Rodrigo and Costa. They've still got Bamford. They really are a team that, depending on what side they roll out, will be extremely tough to beat. But as you mentioned, the fact that it is so early in the season, they still won't know their squad or their first squad, I guess, set up. So they're probably going to tinker with that and work out, who the players are that Bielsa wants to see more of. However, the fact that it is so early in the season, it really is a free hit for us. And I think that on the back of that Gillingham victory, there is no reason why we can't turn up against Leeds and have such an optimistic kind of mindset about playing a big club, playing a Premier League club, and every hope, particularly with the added rivalry side of things, knowing that it is Leeds, that we couldn't cause them problems. And I think any kind of positive result, or even if it's a positive loss, would be a great opportunity for some really big takeaways for us this early on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you make the good point that they're still tinkering with their side. They lost their opening game, so there could be a chance that they'll, whether they look to play Rodrigo to try and give him a bit of confidence and get his first goal in the Leeds shirt, or whether they look to play some of their younger kids. They've made a lot of young signings over the off-season as well. He'll be around the periphery of their first-team squad. They might be looking to play quite a young side. It's going to be a really interesting one. And then from our side, two fullbacks in Coyle and Elder, who I believe are both fit and available now, and as we sort of said earlier, potentially Long as well, could all slot into that side tomorrow. And then we're back to talking about the fact that we do actually have quite a deep squad, that we're rotating our first 11 from the Gillingham victory, but we're actually bringing in players who are arguably first-team caliber. So we start to see a position where, whether it's Magennis and Scott is sort of starting the game and then Lewis Potter gets the start in the league or vice versa, we've got first-team. We're not necessarily going out there playing an under-23 squad to rotate. We're actually got depth in all positions. We might see Meyer make his first appearance, for instance. It's going to be a really interesting look at how we line up. How do you see the lineup for this one?
Yeah, I genuinely think McCann will play with it a little bit. I'm not sure that that we're necessarily targeting a huge cup run or anything of the like. I guess it's that recalibration idea of being a League One side. What does it actually mean for us, particularly with the with the COVID times and not being able to kind of bank on the gate takings and things like that, with playing those big teams and knowing that the flag fall that you can get from that is extremely beneficial to your club. I guess we're just not in the same kind of business of targeting a cup run because of those things that in any other season would be hugely huge incentives for us. They just don't seem to be there, other than the fact that the confidence that you can get from turning over a Premier League side, particularly one you have a rivalry with, would be unreal. So I don't think we're going to see the same side that faced Gillingham. I think we will still obviously have an eye on the league, but as you said, it's such a good opportunity to see the depth in the squad and see what some of these new players can do against a team that is of such high caliber in Leeds.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, based on that, do you sort of said earlier you'd be sort of happy with an honourable loss? Do you see that as the most likely outcome? Do you think, I mean, obviously there's the risk there that they could blow us away, but do you see any chance that we could walk away with the victory?
Oh, absolutely. I, in no way, shape or form would I write City off, particularly when they haven't had a win for so long and to start the season with such a positive result against Gillingham. I wouldn't discount all of those things that we've talked about in the fact that Leeds aren't settled yet. They did have an opening day loss, albeit against Liverpool. There's so many unknowns in this. So if there's ever going to be a time to see City kind of sneak a result of such great magnitude, I think this definitely could be it. The fact that we're playing this early in the season and not later on, I think also plays into that. I give us every chance, and I think that it's very likely to be a draw or a narrow loss. I think if we were to get blown away, it would be hugely disappointing, given the fact that I don't see a huge gulf in where they're at this point in time and where we are, given the fact we won our opening day.
For sure. Well, a side that didn't win their opening day is Crewe Alexandra, who we faced this weekend in our first home league game of the season. They went down to Charlton in the first week, so another side that had been relegated alongside us. David Artell's their manager, who's been with them for about 3 years now, and he's actually been able to progressively move them up the table from 15th he kept them up in the first season, then 15th, then 12th, and then last season had them promoted from League Two. So he's sort of quite an integral part of that team and manages them quite well, would know the squad inside and out, would have built it himself. He's not just, sort of a manager that's come in the last year and is still sort of getting to grips with his side. They've sort of had a mixed start to the season. They beat Bolton in the EFL Trophy and then, as I said, lost to Charlton and then Lincoln City in the League Cup as well. So I guess still coming to grips with League One, still sort of finding their feet, I guess. Mixed results in the Cups. But other than that, as we sort of said with Dan last week, it's sort of a whole case of getting to know new sides down in League One. We haven't played them in a league game since 2006, so it's quite hard to get a sense of how this game will go, not knowing much about them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that until we've kind of seen 10 or 12 games elapse, it's going to be really difficult to make a note of particularly where these other teams are at, but certainly where we're at. I think that if we look at the City squad right through, even players like Scott and Samuelson and players like that have still been playing with City, I just don't get the feeling that we actually know them too well just yet. I think we became accustomed to, particularly with our success under Bruce, of playing players that were really familiar to us. And the like, we expected Hernandez to score. We knew we had David Myler there. There was just these kind of Michael Dawson. There was just these mainstay players that we kind of just expected would be there. And if they weren't, we had someone who we'd seen a lot of coming in and playing that fold, whereas we've just gone through such a sharp decline in such a short amount of time that, as you mentioned, it's not so much about necessarily studying the opposition, but it's also a case of us not really knowing what we have. And so and until we've watched, as I said, a decent amount of football, it's going to be really hard to make these judgments and set expectations for ourselves, other than knowing the fact that a lot of the players we do have on the books have got championship experience. And so if that counts for anything, it should pay dividends in League One. Although that's an optimistic outlook, it certainly would suggest that that is where we should be looking to kind of focus our energy and attain at least a top half table finish.
Yeah, and look, you make a really good point. You look at someone like a Lopez is a perfect example of that, who was with us for 12 months essentially, and from the time of signing until when he left, he became a real mainstay in the side. But he was only with us for the one season, and the fact that our decline has been so sharp and we've been turning over the squad so significantly almost every year. We don't have that sort of settled squad as we used to have. As you said, you'd have your Myler, you'd have Huddleston, you'd have El Mohammadi, Curtis Davies. All of those players were with us for such a significant period in our history, from that sort of 2013 to 2016 stretch, that we just don't have those sorts of mainstays in the side anymore. And I guess Bowen was perhaps one of the biggest cases of that up until recently when he was sold. And maybe a Lewis Potter or De Wijs, I guess, is another one who's sort of starting to fill those roles. But there are so many unknowns in the squad still. And that win against Gillingham really surprised me. I really thought we were going to struggle a lot more than we did. And I think this game against Crewe is going to be a really interesting one, facing a side that's been promoted from the division below. I mean, Gillingham are a pretty experienced League One side, and we swept them aside with relative ease. It'll be interesting to see how we fare against a Crewe Alexandra at home as well, I think, significantly. If it's a game that we can walk away from with a 4 or 5 goal margin, I think that puts a huge statement of intent out to the rest of the league about what we intend to do in this division. Whereas if we are to struggle, if it's a draw, if we scrape a win or scrape a loss, it sort of undoes all of that good work that we put in place last weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the ambition and even being able to say, City in a 4 or 5 goal victory is
it's hard. It's been a while.
Yeah. Whilst it might be jumping the gun, I think you're right. There's every possibility that something that could happen. And if it were to happen, what would we then say as far as our expectation goes? Because it would almost reset entirely and have us dreaming again, which I struggle to say, because it has been such a horrific 12 months in particular, and much longer, but particularly the last 12 months with relegation sealing our fate. And it is really going to be an interesting part of the journey, I guess, in the life of a City fan, as we follow this kind of unknown world, to see what we've got and what does it take to get out of this league.
Yeah, absolutely. So just before we head off, then, do you have a score prediction for this game?
The score prediction for this is how long is a piece of string. It's almost impossible to find, but I'm going to go with, I think it'll be 3-1 City.
Okay, fair enough then. Well, hopefully, look, I think the most important thing is if we can walk away from this with 3 points. I'll say similar. I'll say a 2-0, maybe a 3-0 win. I'd really love to see another clean sheet and really start to put a marker down for that, sort of defensive solidity that we've lacked for quite a while now. And if Ingram and the defense can pick up another clean sheet, I think that would be a fantastic start to the season. Look, before we go, just as I always say, people watching along live or listening later after the fact, if you hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment, share your support for the podcast, that would be fantastic. We do have a Patreon as well. If you want to sign up to that, any sort of support is always well received from us. It'll be a fantastic thing to see from everyone. And then as one of our live viewers has said, and puts it as well as I always do, he says, "Up the Tigers," and I'll say, "Come on, City."